not need? Why would you not need an ID to vote?
I would be all about having an ID to vote if we made it easier for people who don't have the means to have the backup to get that ID, get the means, right? So in order to get an ID to vote, you need a driver's license or a birth certificate, which a lot of people, especially older people living in poverty, don't have access to anymore. Some people don't have driver's licenses. They can't afford to go get a state-issued ID. If we somehow made voter IDs and the means to get them cost-effective for people, I'd have no problem with it. But you have the North Carolina voter ID laws essentially thrown out because they disenfranchise, especially the people that I'm talking about, people who were largely rural, poor, and minority for that reason, because they don't have access to some of these forms of ID that you would need to get to vote. And so that's the problem for me.
But you need that for almost everything.
But it's not a constitutional right.
Okay, so you still are at the hospital and you need emergency care. You have to prove that you know your first name. Like, you need some sort of identification that proves that you actually are who you say you are.
Well, not if you're dying, I assume, right? If you can't answer.
But you can mail in and get a social security card. If you're walking into the ER, you need to show some sort of identification. So why is it offensive at the polling station but not at the hospital?
The only reason
By the way, if you're carted into a polling station on a stretcher, I guess you don't have to show ID.
Right, but the only reason I have no problem with it intellectually. My problem with it is practically that people who don't have the money to get some sort of ID to vote. That's my only concern.
How much money? I mean, you can get a social security card. You just go online at the library and mail it in.
And in New York City, Bill de Blasio, one of his first programs, so everybody in New York feels like they're part of the city, he has a citywide ID program. That's free and stuff. Look, the first part of your argument I actually think is very valid, and it's also a very fixable problem. There should be ID laws that somehow make it affordable, easier to access having an ID. The problem is, when you go to the rhetoric around this from a lot of Democrats further on the left, they just think the idea, period, of having to show an ID is racist. They think it's a poll tax. They think it's something that could potentially lead to intimidation of people from actually physically voting.
I don't agree with that at all.
And I don't either, but I think that's one of the odd rationales, which is why it's crazy that we still are having this conversation. But something as important and fundamental as voting can't be protected by just showing at least it's you who's doing it.
But Tony, you hear Donald Trump talk about this a lot in his campaign speeches, that this election could be rigged against him. How does that argument play for him?
Well, look, it plays to, as we see in this polling, elements of the Republican Party who do fear that, the 52% at least, that voting fraud and voter fraud is a major issue. So it does get the base fired up a little bit. And if you remember from 2008, the whole Acorn kind of fiasco, that occurred in about a dozen swing states. So when people make this blanket statement that voter ID doesn't really affect anything, it's actually not true, because there are a handful of states that are critical, particularly in presidential elections, where even a change of 10 to 20,000 votes can impact
your own personal experience, though, really does impact us. I mean, for myself, I've gone to polling places in New York. I walk in, they're looking for my name. Oh, I don't know, you're registered here. They've handed me a ballot. I've checked it, and they've chucked it in a bin, an open bin behind them. I'm certain that my vote didn't count that time. I was with my kids down in Florida. I was covering the election last time around. And at a polling place, I don't know if the man was taunting me, but, they were bringing in from different districts, and he said, my district is voting Obama no matter what. And he winked at me, maybe because I was from Fox and he was trying to antagonize me, but these are the kinds of things that really make you feel like it's not very high-tech in different places, and it's not necessarily that guarded.
But it isn't very high-tech. It isn't just the way that you feel. It's truthful. I mean, those of us who've lived in smaller communities know that some of them are high-tech and some of them aren't, and what that looks like. And so now the question is it politically aligned with one group or another? And that's an important question to ask. If we get anything right in this country, it ought to be about the democracy of our voting days. As much as we say that the percentage of the population don't vote, then why don't we encourage them by at least getting that right? So what does that look like? We might have to man some stations.
Harris and I monitor our online presence a lot on Facebook and Outnumbered Overtime, and where the chats exist. And there are constantly people writing in about their concern about voter fraud.
Yeah, it's real. I'm worried about Putin hacking into these voter systems. That's what I'm worried about.
And you think by having an identification...
No, different issue. But if we're talking about voter fraud, that's what I'm worried about.
I do think it's a bigger issue, though, about IDs. We have 11 million plus undocumented people in this country. I think identification is something that probably is important, not just for voting day.
All right. So much for that recovery, despite the Obama administration's claim that our economy is back on track. The staggering numbers that show how many Americans actually have negative wealth. Plus, does this election season have you feeling a little lonely? the 2016 race are affecting friendships and how to keep